The most important people in a school aren't always the ones at the front of a classroom. Sometimes they're the ones helping students, families, and teachers navigate the moments that can change everything. Welcome to the Marquis Masters podcast. I'm Nick Franck. Today I'm joined by Dr. Allan Gold, a retired district psychologist who spent 48 years serving the Reed Union School District. Now, one thing I really enjoyed from this conversation is that Dr. Gold's path wasn't planned. It started in math and statistics, took an unexpected turn through the Army Reserve during the Vietnam era, and then ultimately led him into school psychology, a career built around problem solving, trust, and helping people find their footing when life gets hard. In this episode, Allan talked about why he chose this work, what he carried with him from his time in the military, and what he learned supporting students through challenges like divorce, grief, and confidence building, along with the support groups he led for educators caring for their elderly parents. Let's get into it. I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Allan Gold to the Marquis Masters podcast. Dr. Gold, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so diving in, you are a retired district psychologist. What was it that drove you to become a school psychologist?
Okay, I love telling this story because it's very unique. So actually, I grew up, I was involved in math and science. I got a bachelor's degree in mathematics in 1967 from the University of California at Berkeley. And I started a PhD program in statistics. I was going to be a statistics professor. However, it was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and I was in the last cohort of graduate students that had 1 year of deferment. So in 1968, I had to make a decision. And having gone to Berkeley, I was very anti-war. So I had to decide, do I go to Canada? Do I go to jail? Do I get drafted and possibly killed? Or do I join the Army Reserve? So on April Fool's Day of 1969, I joined a hospital unit in the Presidio of San Francisco, where I grew up. And I wasn't actually called for basic training for another whole year. So in April of 1970, I went off to basic training in Louisiana. And after you're finished with basic training, you have to choose what's called an MOS. It's a military occupational specialty. And my two choices were nurse or psychology social work specialist. Okay. And that was 2 weeks shorter, and I opted for that. So I had my further training at Brooke Army Hospital in San Antonio. And I liked the training, except it was actually pretty difficult because we were assigned to helicopter pilots who had been shot down and were burnt. But I liked the training. And then when I got home in September of 70, I didn't go back to graduate school. I took a job with Blue Shield Health Insurance because I had worked there for a couple of summers as an undergraduate. And then I was going to be an actuary, which are the people that do all the statistics for insurance premiums. So I was doing that but then the next summer, when you're in the Army Reserve, you have every year you have to go for 2 weeks of summer camp. So in summer of 71, I was flying back from Fort Lewis, Washington, and talking to a relatively new guy in my company. And it turns out he was in a counseling and school psychology program at Stanford University. I'd never even heard of school psychology before, because when I was growing up, the profession was just starting. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting, because I'd always been interested in education. And I always liked kids. So that fall, I took a course out at San Francisco State in clinical psychology, but I was 25 by then, and I thought it might be too hard to get into a clinical PhD program. So I opted for school psych. I never even had a psych course as an undergraduate. So I went back to school that fall of 72, at Berkeley. I switched from my PhD program in statistics to an undergraduate bachelor's program in psychology, and I loved it. I had to apply for school psychology that fall, and I'd only had one trimester, but I was good at test taking, and I actually got accepted into the school psychology program in 1973, and it was the best decision I ever made. And I love telling that story because I used to tell parents and kids too, because, parents often have um, decisions made for their kids. Oh, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a businessman. And you never know what events are going to come into your life that can change the whole path. So if I hadn't been sitting next to that guy, if I hadn't have had the had to go into the army, I mean, that's the big irony, is because that was the last thing I wanted to do, was be in the military. So that's how I ended up with my career. It was the best decision I ever made.
Well, and if the program had been 2 weeks longer than the nursing program, then maybe we'd be sitting here and you'd be a nurse right now.
Who knows?
It's such a windy road, and for something of you made this decision at a young age. You're like, okay, between jail, Canada, and like I guess I'll join the military. Like, I guess now looking back, like what are some of the things that outside of finding your career and your passion in life, like what kind of lessons do you think you took away from that time in the military?
It's a good question. I guess it really helped me to be independent and to face something that was scary and that I didn't know that I would be able to do. In fact, I remember clearly when I was on the plane to basic training, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted the plane to get there or the plane to crash. Obviously, I wouldn't want to die, but
Right.
I was pretty scared, and but I made it was a very good situation for making new friends. I've always been a pretty social person, but in fact, one of the people that I met in basic training, we're like brothers, and I've known him since 1970. He lives back east, and he's a very, very dear friend. And I wouldn't have met him otherwise. And it was an independence from my parents. I was an only child. My parents were pretty protective, and I didn't go to college very far from from San Francisco, where I grew up. And so it really matured me a lot. And when I was there, there was, the events outside were pretty awful. There was the whole Kent State shootings, and in fact, one of my one of my friends in the company knew one of the girls that was shot during that time. So it was really a growing up time. And I've never been terribly athletic, but I was probably in better shape with all the requirements of the physical requirements that we had to do. So it 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 really helped grow me up, and I think that was important. And it was a lesson that I could face difficult situations and get through them and be resilient, which is something I've needed to do all my life.
And do you feel like too some of that also, like, I think, with some of psychology, when people are going through challenging times, like there are times where, you can draw from your own experience to be
Oh,
able to
yes. I
develop
used to.
a connection. And so how do you feel like that kind of played into it as well, of you being able to develop the rapport with
Oh,
kids and parents?
very much. In fact, with kids who were going through difficult situations, if they were, at least 9 or 10 years old and could remember experiences that they had, I used to talk to them about their history bank. And what I meant by that was um, when we go through experiences, we put it up here and we remember it. And if you're facing a difficult situation, in fact, I deal with that, you know, now. Um, it doesn't matter what part of life you're in, you're always going to face something that's challenging. And if you rely on your history and can refer to it and say, yeah, this was really a difficult situation. I was pretty anxious or depressed or scared, but I got through it. Maybe it wasn't the totally best, wonderful solution, but I did get through it. So I used to work with kids on that too.
Yeah.
Have you ever wondered how some people's stories live on, not just through their work, but through history itself? For nearly 130 years, Marquis Who's Who has been documenting the lives of leaders, innovators, and changemakers across every profession. From CEOs and scientists to artists and educators, Marquis has captured the stories behind success, the people who define our times. Being listed in Marquis Who's Who isn't just recognition, it's taking control of your personal brand and using it to create a meaningful and impactful legacy. It's a record of your life's work, preserved, published, and accessible to generations who will study, research, and be inspired by your contribution. If you've built something meaningful and you've made an impact in your field or community, this is how you ensure your story is told and your personal brand is maintained accurately with integrity. Visit marquiswho'swho.com to learn more about how you or someone you admire can be featured, because history remembers those who take the time to record it.
And what was it like for you, maybe a point of pride to make you smile of, you start with a kid who is, that's 7, 8, 9 years old, and they come in and then you see them maybe a few years later, or, they've chatted with you a lot, and, maybe they've come through the other side of this challenging time. Like, do you ever kind of sit back and think about, like, gosh, I remember when, so-and-so was like this, and we worked together, and like their resilience and that ability?
Oh, yes, yes. And I would express my pride in them if they got through it, and we would talk about that. Yeah. And, I like to think that I was helpful in getting kids through, like divorce situations. That was very, very common. And for years, I ran divorce groups for kids whose parents were divorced or divorcing, usually about 7 or 8 kids, boys and girls. And I usually did it in 3rd through 5th grade. And I thought it was really helpful, so they didn't feel like they were the only ones going through a situation. In fact, groups were very helpful. I helped kids with social skills problems, kids who had parents who might be sick or even dying, kids who had special needs siblings, where all the parental attention went on the sibling. And, and I think groups, for adults, there are grief groups and Alcoholics Anonymous and all of that sort of thing. And, so I think it's important for kids to realize they're not going through life alone.
Yeah. Well, and at your school too, you weren't just working with students. You also were leading, staff groups for teachers that had, elderly parents. So, talk about that experience, because, these things come in different ways, and,
Yes,
adults,
absolutely.
adults also need the help, right? Dealing with adult parents.
Yeah, no, I think maybe it was 15 years ago, I set up a monthly after-school group for faculty, any staff who were taking care of elderly parents. And what I learned most, I think, was it wasn't the parents that were the problems, it was the siblings. Because particularly if the parent if the teacher lived near the parent, they had a lot of the responsibility for caregiving. And how did they make it fair? Like, if their siblings lived 3,000 miles away, how can they deal with this in a fair way? Is it financially? Can they come out and relieve the faculty person of some of the caregiving? So it was again a complicated situation. Not that all psychological issues aren't very complicated, and often there's not a one easy solution to these things. But again, it was good to have a group of these so they could all sort of share their experiences, and often we would brainstorm possible strategies to deal with a particular problem. But it turned out that the siblings were more the difficulty than the parents themselves.
Is that one of the things that was the most, I guess, thrilling or engaging to you within this career, was that different people work differently. And so how they have to problem solve is different for each situation. So you might have two kids that you're working with that have a set of divorced parents, but your actions with them have to be different, right? It's not the same solution. It's not the same care. It's not the same help for these two individuals who might be mentally going through two very different experiences or need something different from you.
Oh, that's absolutely right. That's why the job for, almost 50 years never got boring, because each child was different. Each family is different. And, it really exercised that part of my brain that's the problem solving brain. Having the math background really made me appreciate how to solve problems, because, whether I was helping to solve an emotional problem for a kid, or assessing a kid for learning disabilities, or other kinds of cognitive problems, it's like a puzzle, and not only figuring out what's the matter, but then how do I approach this particular kid? That's why it was so important for me to build a relationship with kids, so that they would trust me. And when I got older, I think I would get Post-it notes on my desk. Can we see you, Dr. Gold? And I would think, why do they want to see this old man? But they knew that I could be playful and funny with them, and also serious, and that they knew that I really cared about them, because I would listen carefully and I would ask them lots of questions to understand them. But as you said, everybody's different, and, how you might solve a problem with one kid. Some kid might have a problem and they're pretty outgoing and have good self-esteem, and they're willing to try something new. And other kids haven't built that. And you have to work on their own internal self-esteem and feelings about themselves to even start activating a possible solution.
Right. I can see after I'm chatting with you about this, about like that math part of your brain, who, like when you're working on a math problem, that's on the board. Like when you get done with a session with someone, like working on a math problem of like, okay, what is the equation that's going to get us to the answer to help this kid get from, this point to this point.
Right, exactly. But there's also, it's not just, you can't just be a math person. You have to have that gut intuition that and the feelings and the empathy that you can really understand that part of a person. So it's a challenging job. I mean, I often said, as a school psychologist, I was a Renaissance man, in the sense that, you have a lot of different skills that you have to activate and use, whether it's those personal things, but, like either the problem solving skills or the empathy, but also just a lot of different areas of knowledge that you have to have as well.
Yeah. Is that something that, when you think back to your youth and your upbringing, like, was problem solving always something that, that you were super interested in, right? Like, you were in for math, like when you were, 7-year-old, Allan out there, just like, you're like, this is like, I love problem solving. Like, talk about that. Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I still do, actually.
Has that always just been such a big part of like your childhood and your upbringing? Was like, I want to be a problem.
Yeah. My father was a math teacher, actually, a high school math teacher. And I was really good at it. And so but I was also a good little boy at school. I skipped a grade, and I skipped 2 half grades because we had highs and lows when I was growing up in elementary school. So I was a year younger than a lot of kids. But I was doing, like in 4th grade, I started learning algebra. But then I would go to school and do what I had to do. And my father would bring workbooks home and things like that. So I always loved doing that.
Yeah. When you think back now of, I'm sure a lot of kids now look at you as someone that, they looked up to because you helped them get from point A to point B. Is there anyone that you can think back of your career that inspired you, was a mentor, like someone that helped you get to, point A to point B to point C?
That's a good question. I think the head of the person at Berkeley who started the school psychology program in 1965, Nadine Lambert. She was really a role model. She could be a difficult person, and unfortunately, when she was 79, she was professor emerita, and she was driving to school, and a garbage truck lost control and crashed into her car and killed her. It was very, very sad. But she was a very wonderful role model, and she was always talking about how school psychologists, in fact, that was part of our program, is to learn how to be a consultant, not just the, testing kids and so on. So that was a good role model. And she was always promoting a lot of variation and breadth in our jobs. And because some school psychologists, all they do is assess kids all day and write reports. But her model was, you can do lots and lots and lots of helping activities, including counseling, including, consultation with parents and faculty and administrators. So I think she was a very powerful role model. She was also a very powerful person. She didn't always get along with everybody, but that was another whole issue. But I got along with her pretty well. In fact, after I got my PhD in '78, I worked in 2 school districts. And then in 1980, I was actually hired as an adjunct professor at Berkeley in the school psychology program, where I worked for 8 years. And so she was my boss,
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn how to get along with her.
Sure.
But that was exciting as well.
Yeah.
And I was working at the same time in my district. So that was a part-time job. And I appreciated the fact that I had the real on-site activities to share with my graduate students.
Right. Right. And, as we kind of move into activities, moving away from, Dr. Gold, the psychologist, to, Dr. Gold, the person, what do you do outside, when you're not, I don't know, diagnosing people or solving their problems? Like, what are you doing in your free time?
Well, when I was 8 years old, I got polio. And it was the year before the Salk vaccine was invented. And I fortunately I wasn't paralyzed. I didn't end up in a iron lung, but I did have to stay home. I was just starting 4th grade. And one of my mother's friends gave me this little thin stamp album and 100 stamps. And I was stuck in bed. It was a perfect thing for me to do. And I've been collecting stamps ever since. I know it's not a popular hobby among younger people, but I learned so much from it. I learned all about different countries and geography and history and culture and so on. And I still collect stamps. So that's one of my hobbies. My mother was an artist. Had she been of a younger generation, she would have made a career out of it. When she was young, she was born in 1903, actually, and in her early 20s, she would go to the South Sea Islands and do pen and ink sketches, and then she would draw. But when she got married, and she kind of gave it up, and then when she had me, she was a mother. She did go back to school or to classes, I think, at one of the museums when she was like in her 60s or 70s, but. Anyway, I used to like to draw when I was elementary school, but I never did it again. And then when I was turning 30, I was in my 3rd year of graduate school psychology, and I was pretty much of a perfectionist. And I was thinking, well, if I can't be Monet or Picasso, I'm not going to do this. And I didn't want to grade, in that. But at Berkeley, and then I don't know if they still have it, but they had a monthly newsletter that advertised private courses in all kinds of areas. And I found in July of 76, I found a woman who was teaching art, 6 sessions for 2 hours each for $25, which was, I guess, reasonable then. And I started going to her, and I'm still going. So, and she's turning 97 this year.
Wow.
So she's 96 now, and she's a wonderful role model.
Yeah.
So I do that every Tuesday, unless I'm going to a play or something like that. I do oil painting, and I've done lots of paintings. In fact, our group is having a show at the beginning of March to show off our work at her in her house. So those are my two main sort of hobbies. But I've been going to the symphony for years and years with my parents, and then with me, and then I go to plays. I've gone to the American Conservatory Theater, which is the main San Francisco theater company. Since it came there in 1966, I was a senior in college. So I go to plays. I go to other groups, the Berkeley Repertory Theater, New Conservatory Theater. So I love going to plays, and I've always been involved in my synagogue since 1977. It was a synagogue formed by 3 gay men for gay and lesbian people, and it made a huge difference in my life because I'm gay, and it was a way for me to integrate my being Jewish and being gay. And I was president of it in 1991 to 93. It was right in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. And the first 3 months, about 13 or 14 of our congregants died. But I've been involved with that. Some years more. I'll tell you one thing. In 2008, I started a group for gay dads. These were gay men who were either single or with partners, but they had adopted children.
Sure.
And the kids were like 2 to 7 at the time. Now they're 20 to 24 or so. But they really needed help and guidance in raising these kids, and because they were very, very troubled kids, emotionally troubled, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, things like that. And I used all of my school psychology knowledge to guide them through. So all of them ended up in special education, and we still meet once a month, and we're like a little family now. And about 6 years ago, I started another group for parents. They were in the synagogue. They were straight parents, but we meet once a month on Zoom too. And their kids are almost all teenagers now. And but it really helps. They love having the opportunity to discuss their kids and all the issues that come up with. And, when you have kids, the issues don't end. Like all of my gay dads now, their kids are in their early 20s, and they're struggling with what next. I think the early 20s are one of the hardest eras or ages to be, because you don't know where you're going to live, what your career is going to be, who you're going to have a relationship with, and all that. So there's a lot of decisions to make at that time, and that's helpful. And another thing I do, about 7 years ago, they started a group at the synagogue called Adult Orphans. And it was for people who were over 60, who didn't have any parents anymore and not family around. So we used to meet at the synagogue once a month, and there would be lecturers talk about senior living and care and that kind of stuff. And then COVID happened and everything, it all went online. And we had monthly meetings on Zoom, which we still do. And a lot of the people stepped out, and I was asked if I would kind of host them. So we have about every second and fourth Wednesday, we have meetings, and people share what's going on with them too. Sometimes we end up with, a pretty serious discussion. Well, there are always serious discussions, but, depending on what issues each of the people are dealing with, whether it's health or living places or politics or, that kind of thing. So, again, one thing I totally value is just my social relationships and my connections to people. That's keeping me going.
Yeah. I was going to ask, hearing all the things that you're doing within your synagogue, like how important is your community to you and giving back and being so ingrained in part of that?
Yeah, no, it's very important. There's a Jewish phrase called tikkun olam, which means making the world a better place. And, for me, that's always been, kind of my ethical foundation. How can I make the world a better place? There's always more that we can do, obviously. Particularly the way things are now. What can we do to make the world a better place? And it's very, very challenging. But I've also realized that we don't have to push ourselves to make ourselves crazy. The more, if we can reach out and, help one person or help a few people get through their lives and their situations, that's a positive service to people.
Yeah. Sometimes it can get a little intimidating to see and feel like, we're all just one person and how much can we do? And I think, narrowing the scope, right? As you said, help one person, help just like it's a ripple effect, right? You help this one person and maybe they help somebody else. And, it's in your circle, right? It's in your community and build out from there.
And you never know what's going to happen, in your personal life about helping other people. So I've been HIV positive for probably 43 years now or something like that. And all my male partner, I was married actually once to a woman back when I was 23, and we're still friends. She's married. She married somebody 2 years after we divorced, and he's 89, and she just turned 78 yesterday, actually. And all she does is take care of him. So, it's pretty sad. So I had 3 male partners. All of them have passed away. My latest one was, his name was Allan too. And we met in 1995. And I had written, it was before online dating and that kind of stuff. And so I wrote an article in a gay newspaper in San Francisco. And he answered it. Well, about 12 people did, actually. Yeah. And he had just lost his, 3 years earlier, had lost his partner to AIDS. And I told him I was HIV positive, and this was before medicine happened. And I said, "Are you sure you want to be with me?" And he did. And so we were together for 29 years. But in 2003, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and which he had gotten in Korea during the Vietnam War because he was exposed to Agent Orange. So he had it for 21 years, and it was a very slow decline. The first 15 years really wasn't much at all, and then there was little more and more. So I had to take care of him, and he died in August of 2024. He was 76. And so I had to deal with how do I take care of him and how do I take care of myself? Because I was still working. I ended up retiring then because I couldn't, his health declined and I couldn't go to work. And take care of him. So the last year was pretty difficult. He was in a hospital, a veterans hospital, which took extremely good care of him, and the VA, and then he was in a long-term care facility where he passed away. But yeah, just what you're saying, we have to figure out how much we can give to others and how much we have to take care of ourselves. And there's no one easy answer. I mean, there used to be groups for patients and caregivers, and I would hear about these caregivers that would do nothing, but they would be constantly with their partners and their wives or their husbands, and it was really difficult. So each of us has that, so enjoy life while you don't have to deal with. But then there's the sandwich generation. You might have to take care of elderly parents, and you have children to take care of too. So you could be sandwiched in caregiving. So it's, I don't want to be depressing about it, but if you do it right and you find ways to take care of yourself too, which is resting, exercising, going on little trips, socializing, doing entertaining things. We have to take care of ourselves, because if we can't take care of ourselves, then we can't take care of anybody else.
Yeah. Through this conversation we've started with, you're a mathematician, and then there was, you having to, go to jail or go to Canada or go to war, and then finding your career and working with kids, and then having multiple partners and then losing them and having HIV. Like, you've lived, there's been a lot of ups and downs, roller coasters of like a story of your life. Like, when you look back, like, I don't want to say like the number one important thing that you've learned, but like, what's like a really big lesson in life that throughout all these experiences that you were like, this is the thing, like, this is what I've learned, and this is like what I'm taking away?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to one of your first questions, which is, about that history. And I think what I've learned a lot of lessons. One is that I'm not going to live this perfect life where everything is easy. And I've got a lot of resilience and a lot of strength to, get through these things. I've learned that. The polio and the HIV wasn't the only thing. I was in a horrible car crash about 6 years ago, and fractured 6 ribs, and that was a mess. The shutdown for COVID happened 3 days later, which was very convenient, and I healed up from that. I had prostate cancer 10 years ago. So I think what I've learned is that I'm really a strong person, and I can get through difficult things. Other things I've learned are the importance of communication. And I think I've developed that realization more recently, actually, particularly because I find young people these days are so limited on how they communicate because of electronics. They don't sit in. I've worked with so many kids trying to deconstruct messages that they will post to each other, mean kinds of things, and what's really going on. Because when you text people, you don't see their faces, you don't know their reactions to what you're saying, and I've worked with lots of kids, like 5th grade on up, to try to figure out, what's going on here. She's mean to me. Well, what do you mean by mean? Because everybody interprets words a little bit differently. And, also with communication, you really have to know how, and parents, I've talked to parents and I've talked to kids so much about how do you communicate in a way that you're not going to drive the other person away. I used to talk to kids about soft feelings and hard feelings and I statements. So a hard feeling is anger. And, how do you respond when somebody gets angry at you? What do you do?
Right.
What do you do?
Oh, when someone's angry with me,
Yeah.
gosh, I probably shut down. Like sometimes I kind of like probably like get a little defensive and try to think like, well, what did I do wrong?
Yeah, right.
You get a
You
little
get
the
defensive,
face.
you shut
Yeah.
down, or
Mm-hmm.
you hit back,
Mm-hmm.
verbally or sometimes even physically.
Right.
So I would teach kids to identify what their soft feelings are, because most of the time when we're angry at something, there's another feeling underneath. The anger pops up quickly, but it might be you're worried or you're hurt or you're anxious or you're confused. It can, I mean, sometimes things just make you angry. Of course, I understand that, but if a kid or a parent can express their feelings with a soft feeling, for example, if a parent's angry with their kid because they're dawdling around and they're going to be late to school, hurry up, get going, I'm going to be late. On the other hand, if the parent said calmly, I'm really concerned that you're going to be late for school and I'm going to be late for work and my boss is going to get angry with me. Can we really get going here? And I think there's more chance that the other person will understand that. And I used to work with the divorced kids, how to, if their parents are fighting in front of them or saying bad things about the other parent, don't just say, shut up, mom, or something like that, but say something, mom, I feel really confused and hurt when you talk about dad that way, or when you're yelling at each other, I'm really scared. Can you please not do that in front of me? I think there's a better chance that kind of communication might have a more effective result. So communication is really important. Um, and another thing that I learned is giving compliments. And it took me a while to realize that it wasn't a win-lose situation. If I give somebody a compliment, then that
Right.
means I'm not good enough or something.
Right.
And I mentioned earlier about um, self-esteem, because I think one's self-esteem really dictates what you're able to do or try, because everybody has to step out of their comfort zone. If a little baby never stepped out of their comfort zone, they'd never walk,
Right.
or they'd never read, or they'd never get toilet trained, or things like that.
Mhm.
So we all have to do that. So I would work with kids who would be really afraid of social situations. They didn't want to ask another kid to play because they were afraid of being rejected or ignored or something like that. So they confined themselves. So if one's self-esteem is a little bit higher or a lot higher, then you can accept that you're not a bad person. You're able to try things. You're able to accomplish things. So I used to work, I talked about a history bank. I used to talk to kids all the time about a self-esteem bank. When I met a new kid, particularly if one seemed to be very shy and not willing to try things, I'd ask them, tell me 3 or 4 things you're proud of yourself for. And the younger ones would say, well, I'm good at soccer, or I'm a good reader, or something like that. And the older ones would say, well, I'm a really nice friend, and I'm funny, and I've got a lot of energy, or, something like that. And then I would talk to kids about developing a self-esteem bank. And this is not bad for adults either, actually. And I would say, what do we do with the bank? And we put money in it. And when we need the money, we take it out. And so it's the same thing with self-esteem. And I would tell kids, every night, before you go to sleep, I want you to think of one thing that you did today that you're proud of yourself for. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't mean you had to get an A+ on your spelling test, or you made 20 baskets when you were playing basketball. It could be, I helped somebody who fell down on the playground, or I picked up my desk mate's book that dropped, or I said something nice to somebody. And building that self-esteem bank, because when either we're hard on ourselves, and everybody is, you make a mistake and say, oh, I'm so stupid, I'm never going to do this. Or there's somebody, there's so much bullying and teasing now. You have to be prepared to say, wait a second, that's that kid's problem. I know that I'm good at this, and I'm a good person, and I'm funny, and, a good friend, and whatever. So it's important to keep that in mind. And I think that's true for adults too, because, parents can be very hard on themselves, and kids pick up on that. So I learned that. So, and by giving compliments, I was talking to kids over the years, and many kids said, well, it takes about 10 compliments to undo a derogatory comment that somebody says, and, like even I remember when I was about 50 and they had a poll at the end of the year, and they put at one of my schools, and they asked questions like evaluating, different people. And the principal shared that with me, and say there were 100, 97 people said I walked on water, and the other 3 said, send them out to pasture or something like that. So at that age, I thought, I paid attention to those.
Great.
Not that I'm against feedback, because I think feedback is extremely important. And that's part of communication too. If we want somebody to change because they're doing something that annoys us or bothers us or is, doesn't feel right, if we just keep quiet, people aren't going to change.
Right.
You need feedback. But then how do you communicate that feedback so that the other person isn't offended, like you said, if somebody gets angry at you? So I used to work a lot with kids on that. If I'd had 2 or 3 kids that were having difficulty socially, and, so we'd talk about, well, she's mean or he's mean. Well, what do you mean by mean? And then I would have them complete a sentence. Complete this sentence. If you did just a little more of this or a little less of that, I think we could be better friends. So to be very specific about what's going on. So all of this is really communication skills. How do we communicate so that other people will listen? And I think the role models now in this country are horrible, because people are just putting other people down. People do not communicate. Republicans don't communicate with Democrats, and vice versa. People with different opinions. It's perfectly okay to have different opinions about things, but putting the other person down, calling them stupid or whatever you do, doesn't promote communication. And there's never compromises or agreements without effective, respectful communication.
Yeah. And Dr. Gold, as we wrap up our conversation today, what does being a Marquis Who's Who listee mean to you?
That's a good question. It's really an honor, and I hope that people actually can look at me as a model for doing good in the world, and helping other people. I don't know how many people read biographies and all that sort of stuff, but I'm hoping that this interview will people. In fact, I can ask you, how is this marketed so that people will look and maybe learn something? I don't know. Did you learn anything from this?
I did. Yes. I've just been trying to absorb as much as I possibly can from this conversation, and trying to think about ways I can implement it in my own life. So yes, this has been fantastic.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. And then, another thing is that with podcasts and interviews, it's really nice if people really wanted to contact me and talk over these things. Like I'm still in contact with some former students from ages 22 to 57, actually. And, so I do some counseling of former students' children, or I help a former student in their 20s to figure out their career and stuff like that. So if somebody actually wanted to talk to me, and I'm not talking about charging money for that, just, if I could listen and maybe guide them a little bit, that's great. So I don't know if Marquis Who's Who provides contact information, but, because once I will say, retiring was one of the hardest things for me. Because if you're in a helping profession all your life, and that's how you define yourself, how do you redefine yourself? So for me, keeping in contact with people and being able to help people is super important to me. Not that I don't, take care of myself, and not that I don't like being, having attention paid to me. I'll admit that. I was an only child, so I did get a lot of attention. But it's important to continue doing what I did at some form for as long as I can.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Gold, thank you so much for joining me, for sharing all of your insights with me today.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you for the interview and all of your good questions. Awesome. Made me think.
Yeah, good. Well, hey, if this conversation made you think, consider sharing the episode with someone who works in education, mental health, leadership, anyone navigating these complexities of caregiving and support. And if you'd like to hear more conversations with people just like Dr. Gold, whose work reflects compassion, resilience, and lasting impact, make sure to visit marquiswhoswho.com and subscribe to the Marquis Masters podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, leave a review, and again, share it with someone else. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Allan Gold, for joining me. I'm Nick Franck, and we'll catch you for the next Marquis Masters podcast.
Okay, bye, Nick. Thanks so much.